least like a couple thousand, if not like, close to 10,000, right? Something like that. But there was really only it sounds like 400 or 500 who were actually considering themselves Sikh. Um, and they already had like all these gurdwara and stuff. So I think it's pretty interesting how many people were, just a ratio of people to gurdwara that they had at that time. It must have been like for every gurdwara, just 15, 26, something like that.
Yeah, that's a great point. And then we get into this idea of like, the British really honed in on trying to categorize everything. And they pose questions to people who have such a different reference of mind to say, are you Hindu or are you Sikh? Especially in places like Orissa, where a lot of the maybe local community are going to Gurdwara, they're going to the Jagannath Puri, they might be also going to some local Sufi shrines or even like shamans and things like that. If you ask them to define their own religion, it's going to be a little bit tough. So you're right, yeah, like I'm pretty sure the number is something much higher. Another example I can think of is if you look at the kind of censuses in places like Sindh, especially some districts in Sindh where they have a quote-unquote large Nanak-Panthi population. After kind of a few years, the numbers will be totally different, and it'll be the way the British kind of census and ethnographers posed the question and kind of clarified the question. So you'll see the number of like Sikhs and Hindus like without like any famine or anything like jump a few thousand either way, which is kind of interesting. So yeah, I think we can take probably that number with a grain of salt. It's probably obvious that even if there was only a few hundred that were kind of maybe visible Sikhs, if that, that a lot of the nearby community definitely kind of visited and patronized the Gurdwara in the area.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. My thinking was like, the Sikhs who had come, and I think, at first it was mostly laborers from the Ramkariya caste. It seems like they were very efficient in opening up Gurdwara. Because like, I think the migrants from Punjab were probably mostly the people who were actually identifying themselves as Sikh. And
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. The amount of Gurdwara that they opened is, it's pretty astonishing. And I mean, these obviously weren't like, erected buildings, like huge, like, the Gurdwara that were used to huge marble inlay or whatever. It's kind of like they mentioned, like one was like a thatched shed or something like that, right? But like they, just made use with what they had. But still, like, I thought it was pretty astonishing.
I think since we have some people in here now, maybe we'll just read the summary and conclusions, and then we can close it up. What do you think?
Yeah. Sounds good.
Unless you got anything else you want to bring up.
I can't really think of any. I mean, there's they mentioned some stuff about the modern, like, Odisha Sikh board, where they kind of like are gathering like information of everyone, and I think it's just a really good example of like not a lot of Sikhs, but they are still working together like as a community, and just trying to support each other as much as possible. Yeah, other than that, not much.
I think that's something interesting to talk about. So I can just kind of tell you just kind of my family. My dad came here in the 80s to Southern California, and there was a Sikh population over here, but of course it's very spread out. And kind of everyone literally knew everyone.
Right.
And so even if like today, like there's maybe like 2-3 generations down from those like people, it's very kind of cross community, across economics. Like it was kind of very nice because, in Punjab, there's still a lot of like classism, casteism, sometimes within like kind of your day-to-day community, where you might go to school with somebody from like a different community, but not necessarily kind of have like close relations with them. But I think the diaspora kind of forces you to kind of look beyond that and be like, "Hey, banda Sikh hai ga," that's like, so that's my person, right? So I think you see that happening a lot in different diasporas, especially kind of outside of northern India, Punjab, especially eastern India, southern India, the West, especially in the early days when there wasn't a lot of us, kind of in different parts of the United States. It's kind of unlike the UK and Canada, where a lot of the immigrants kind of settled in one area. I don't know if other people have similar experiences, but it kind of reminded me of that a bit.
So yeah, I mean, it does remind me of SoCal, because I know exactly what you're talking about. Like, it's not like Yuba City or Surrey, where like if you see another Sikh, it's like not really that big of a deal. Like if you see another Sikh in SoCal, like, you know, when I was growing up, for sure, it's like it's a big deal. Friend. You're like, oh, this is a Sikh. Like I barely ever see another Sikh. And yeah, you know, it seems like, and that's what they were kind of touching on as well, in the article, that kind of like these caste community lines were still kind of there, right? But the Sikhs in general would like to live around each other. Like, no matter the caste lines, like there was, I guess, like in different cities, there was kind of like a Sikh neighborhood where like, no matter the caste, like it was mostly just like Sikhs living there, because they were kind of replicating home, you know what I mean? And that's kind of what the article was touching on, how a lot of their practices were kind of, you know, Sikhs were kind of making their own home wherever they go. And I think that's kind of been like the common, you know, story of the diaspora as well.
No, definitely. Okay, let me read this summary now. This is section 13, summary and conclusions. The study argues that Odisha has long been a contested terrain between different Sikh traditions. The othering of Indian Sikhs in Sikh studies has marginalized their enduring and variegated agency in Odishan history. Sikh presence can be dated back to pre-colonial times, when the coastal Odishan tracts were privileged to accommodate the arrival of Udasi and Nanakpanthis in the early 17th century. They interface with the dominant regional tradition, set up the Matha network to welcome long-distance pilgrims, including those from Punjab. Their existence was certainly not unknown to their counterparts in Punjab. Fragments of Odishan experience preserved in the Janam Sakhi narratives of Guru Nanak's Udasi to Puri confirm the point. Extended Odishan residents facilitated their interaction with members of the host society and enabled them to integrate local customs, tastes, and values. This functioned only to distance their subjective experiences from those of the Sikhs of Punjab, locating those experiences expressively in Odia popular culture and traditions. With growing visibility in and around Puri, the Nanakpanthi and Udasi Sikhs participated in different temple rituals of Lord Jagannath, as well as celebrated popular local festivals in the streets of Puri, expressively in the common Odia cultural tradition. Some of these experiences produced mixed reactions that would lead to major breaches amongst a section of the Mangu Matha insiders and stimulate the foundation of another hospice, Nanak Bauli. Such fragmentation in their ranks was intensified by public disputes in local courts, evoking bitter criticism in Odia writings. Despite such differences, members of the Nanakpanthi and Udasi traditions remained numerically dominant in coastal Odisha until the end of colonial rule. Their entrenched position in the Puri Matha network, however, did not fail to evoke anger at different levels. Following the success of the Akalis in Punjab in 1920s, voices of protest were raised against them by the Odia nationalist Gopa Bandhu Das, which later on crystallized and took a definite shape in the form of an alternative model of Gurdwara takeover in Odisha in the 1930s at the behest of the UUC. The early Sikh tradition, however, continued to receive varied forms of opposition in the post-independence years, when the number of Punjabi Sikhs migrated increased significantly, following large-scale industrialization and emergence of numerous construction properties in the distant parts of the province. Immigrant Punjabi Sikhs came from diverse territorial locations, distant social backgrounds, and varied professional expertise. Despite this diversity, they struggled to portray themselves as a homogeneous group with the 5 Ks and communication in the Punjabi language. Their growing presence with the numerous gurdwaras under an apex body, celebration of community festivals, Khalsa schools, and so on, gave them the opportunity to recreate home in Odisha. These representations made the Punjabi Sikhs not only a visible minority in the host society, but transformed them into a diasporic community. They asserted their Punjabiness, represented themselves as the sole repository of Sikhi in Odisha, and denounced Udasi and Nanak Panthis for making a character of the Sikh Guru's message. Odisha, thus made room for two distinct traditions of Sikhism with their competition, rivalry, hierarchy, diversity, failing to evoke any serious attention of Sikh scholars in Sikh studies. Some of the dissimilarities in perception are viewed as aberrations and accreations of the message of the Sikh gurus, and hence to be located beyond the normative prism of the Singh Sabha narrative. This study underlines the fact that these living images represent interesting attempts at redesigning Sikhi in the pre-colonial coastal Odisha by the local population. In their new home, away from Punjab, some of these encounters still survive in popular imagination and circulate among the pilgrims' routes to Puri. These are reflections on how these evolved out of a long dialogue between members of the host society and their guests arriving from Punjab over the centuries. Hence, the repeated attempts to silence popular images of early Sikh tradition by immigrant Sikhs of Odisha are interventions to redesign the host society's popular culture in accordance with their fixed and rigid notions of Sikhism. Finally, the study draws attention to another interesting issue. The Singh Sabha narrative was successful in homogenizing in modern Sikhism that emerged in colonial Punjab in the late 19th century. But the study raises the doubt of its extent in success in coastal Odisha under colonial rule. Its restricted nature of achievement gives rise to a debate that continues within the 21st century. Addition of it within the domain of Sikh studies will point to an emergence of a refreshing frontier on the discipline. And that's the conclusion. Pretty interesting article. I put the link up on my profile if you guys want to read it. It's from the Sikh Formations Journal, which comes out, I think, once or twice a year. Has some interesting stuff, some weird articles as well. But all in all, it's got some good stuff to think about. Minshan, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
So I think one thing is that this article, whenever it was, I think it was written in 2017, it kind of makes it seem like the Mahant of Mangu Math is like, there's still a Mahant there, he still has some sort of influence or something, and at least like whenever the article was being written, or maybe in the 2010s, whatever. Once we get to 2019, I don't know if you've seen the videos of like the Nahang Singhs when they go to Mangu Math to kind of prevent it from being torn down, but it just looks like abandoned, desolate. And I guess, you know, what I'm kind of curious about is what happened to this Mahant, because he was never removed, right? Even though there was this kind of fissure between Punjabi Sikhs and these like local Mutts, there was like, you know, this article is kind of saying there was a Mahant who kind of was still there and still kind of, you know, doing his own thing. So I'm kind of curious what happened. Like, did he give the land to the government? Did the government just force him out? Did he lose some sort of influence? Yeah, I don't know.
There was an article in the Indian Express in 2019, and the SGPC sent a delegation to Odisha, and they said they have assured us that Mangu Math won't be demolished, but at the same time we found no evidence that Guru Nanak Dev Ji ever visited Mangu Math. Yes, there's been an idol of Shri Chand at Mangu Math. Guru Nanak Dev Ji had gone to Jagannath Puri, but it's not clear whether he stayed in Mangu Math or not. We don't have any evidence to say that, which is kind of pretty weak from the SGPC to say something like that, right? Sorry, SGPC, if you're listening. But I think, yeah, there's no, of course, like physical evidence of any of that. But if there's popular culture and oral history and like a long-standing tradition that, you know, that there's something important happened over here, saying that we don't have evidence of that is just shooting ourselves in the foot and kind of very disrespectful to all the other Sikhs who have maintained that area and kind of, you know, kept it. But yeah, it's so exactly not clear to me. It sounds like it's owned by the Odisha government at this point, the area, and I think they probably have some kind of deal with. I don't know the exact way how these kind of temples work within the central government or the local governments, if they have to have like a panel or if there's someone appointed from the government to oversee it, and maybe somebody else can tell us about that. But if there's anyone in the audience who has any insight or anything they wanted to talk about, feel free to request to talk. Otherwise, we'll close up this room. I'll leave the recording up so you guys can share it or listen to it, pick it apart and correct me or Mishan if we're wrong about anything. we'll see about possibly starting a new book in a couple weeks. Otherwise, we might do another article or two. If you guys in the audience find anything particularly interesting or worth talking about, send it to me or Manshan, and we can take